I am delighted to be joined today by Ian McDermott and Tricia Riddell. It's lovely to see you both. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to tell us a little bit more about your presentation that you are delivering one of the masterclasses in November 2025. And your masterclass is How Are NLP and Coach Neuro-Effective? So please do start by telling us a little bit more about yourselves and your presentation.
Oh, where to begin? Tricia, shall I go first?
Yeah, please do.
So, about ourselves, it is plural, really, because we've been doing stuff together. We were thinking about this about 15 years, so there's some little while now. And what actually started that whole ball rolling was we didn't know each other, but we were both committed to bringing this kind of tsunami of neuroscience research into a more user-friendly form.
Yeah.
And I knew I couldn't do that because I'm not a neuroscientist. I could read as many books as I like. It'd never be any good, really. And when I met Trish, it was just a wonderful thing because we both had this common commitment. And that's how it all began. And then, from my point of view, it was about, let's bring it into the NLP because it's so validating of NLP, but it also gives us a different understanding. So we started making part of the program, practitioner program, neuroscience explicitly. And then I should really hand over to Trish because we've started going from there, didn't we?
Absolutely. And, you know, I came with at least an NLP practitioner background and had, with another trainer, found it quite frustrating that they kept saying that the neuroscience wasn't effective and that, you know, that neuroscientists didn't believe in the stuff that NLP was teaching. And I was sitting there going, well, I've got a very good model that I can use. And it got to the stage that the class knew that I had this background in neuroscience and they would watch me. And if I was nodding along, then they were happy. And if I was sitting there clutching the edge of my chair thinking, this, you know, please let me just say something, then they would stop and say, you know, what's relevant here? What can we add? So meeting Ian and having the opportunity to actually put the neuroscience and the NLP together was brilliant. But we've gone on from there because there are so many uses that you can put neuroscience to. So we put the neuroscience into the coaching, and we've recently been working, we've run for the last 12 years an applied neuroscience program, which is literally just, what can we tell you about neuroscience that's useful to you as a human being? And that's where we came up with the idea of, well, what's neuro-effective? How do we use this? Because it's not about the neuroscience. For both of us, it's about the application. So like, why is it worth people knowing this stuff? And so this neuro-effective, we're publishing a book that's coming out in June on neuro-effective leadership. But that neuro-effective brand just goes through everything that we do.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, I mean, I know neuroscience has been acknowledged for a while now, but what's fresh, innovative and new that delegates will take away from your session?
Oh, gosh. Well, in a way, it's hard to answer that. But I mean, the quick answer is, well, what wouldn't be fresh and new? Because most of us don't have a sufficient understanding of the field, or we have a sort of slightly odd version of neuroscience. That to me, what was really important was, if we were going to do anything like this, I really needed a neuroscientist. And that's what Patricia is. She's a friendly neuroscientist, but nevertheless, it's like, we're not messing around here with, well, you could say that's kind of like this in NLP or something. It's more about how can we have an understanding which could be a basis for better practice or a basis for describing what it is that works in a language that, frankly, legitimates it to pretty much anybody who's aware that there's this extraordinary wave of research that's taking place and has been for many years now. So we'd like people to go away with some particular things they can use. We're not going to go through it all now, otherwise I'm not sure why we need to turn up at all. But we'd like people to have an experience of doing it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is this translation process from the neuroscience to its application, and you suddenly see the overlap with what coaching at its best does, what NLP at its best does. And you understand why, and anybody else can understand why. And if you want a language to legitimate interventions, by golly, this would be it. Conscious mind loves it, but frankly, a little goes a long way. A bit my version, Trish.
Yeah, and I think it is that it's that if I'm using this technique and I have the evidence of the fact that it's worked on so many people, then do I need the neuroscience? And the answer is, I've always felt that when you're dealing with NLP, there are two types of people. The people that just want to believe it's magic. And for those people, you will not need anything more than the techniques. But there are some people that want to be convinced that there's something real behind it. And I think the neuroscience brings that to it. It adds that extra credibility.
And wonderful, because NLP is so much about applying the things that we know. So to be able to combine those two applications, I think is going to be very powerful. So sorry, Ian, carry on.
Oh, go on. Well, it's just exactly that. You know, it's like, to me, this seemed like a marriage made in heaven. And you know, and there are very interesting instances over the years that have demonstrated this to me. I mean, there was something that happened early on. I was asking Trish just almost like, you know, standard good modeling practice. You know, well, okay, here's a specialist in their field. I'm not. So what would you say current lay understanding is versus current thinking in the field? And you'd expect there to be some kind of time lag. And she sort of paused, looked into the middle distance, and said, I don't know, 30, 40 years. I thought, good God, you know, this is a generation plus. I mean, this is not acceptable to be that far removed from current thinking. But then it just got worse, because you came back and you said, I remember this. You said, you know, I've been thinking about this. And what did you say?
Well, the old models that are still in use are, at that time, they were 50 years out of date. Now they're 60 years out of date. They're as old as I am.
It's just like, wow, this is very strange. So something's gone awry here. So that bit, it really matters that we can have a current understanding, but it also goes the other way, because take something like timelines in NLP.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember having a conversation with Trish where she was saying, oh, there's some very interesting research, and basically, well, you should say it because you said it originally. Well, neuroscience catching up.
It sometimes feels like the neuroscience is just catching up on what the NLP has been using for a long time. And I see this a number of times: association, disassociation, timelines. Our understanding of what's happening in the brain is expanding, but it's expanding into, and I'm not surprised by this, it's expanding into things that practitioners, therapists have known for some time.
Yes.
So it's kind of catching up with the things that have always worked and giving us a better understanding of why they work.
No, you can either get, you know, aggravated by that and feel like, well, we know this, so, you know. But on the other hand, you could actually be rather gratified that there is a process whereby we can experientially explore and determine effectiveness. And it may not involve a double-blind trial, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But to have the validation is interesting, and to be able to then have conversations across the disciplines could be kind of useful. That's part of what we've been doing for the last decade plus.
And in the introduction to one of the Bibles of NLP, it says specifically, NLP is moving away from the science now, but it will always need to come back.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, it's timely that it does.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, you know, that's part of why it seemed that being able to pin these things down was really useful. So the discipline of creating and training is a very good way of doing that. But the writing of the book, which has taken, shall we say, some little while, was actually a very good discipline as well, because it's like, how do you translate this into terms that someone who's not on a training that you're running and can shape can still make sense of? And we had this interesting experience when we were talking to the publisher of how the feedback was very strong about, this is wonderful, because it's like giving how-tos at the end of chapters. It's like, okay, so what have we learned in this chapter? And how are you going to personally apply that? Reflections. And how could you professionally apply it? So that kind of, okay, can we nail this down in ways that people can just say, I'll have a bit of that. I'll try that this week at work. You know, that's a good test of, are we doing our job of essentially translating?
I'm
And it's
looking
been,
forward to this book.
well, yeah, yes, buy the book, but it's more the process we had to go through to write it meant it took a fair while, and we didn't even try, because to begin with, for doing the applied neuroscience program was itself the discipline of, are we going to present and present and present? And once we got that down, then we felt we're probably ready now to talk to a larger audience who we won't be able to engage with in quite the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful. So what top tip would you give to delegates attending your session?
So we had several answers to that, which is the first one of which is come to the session.
Yes, that would be the top tip.
Turn up.
But in thinking about this, I was asking Ian, he brought the neuroscience into NLP and coaching. And for me, there was a really interesting question about, well, what's the benefit been? Why was that worth doing, or was it worth doing?
Oh, it's definitely worth doing. And we started by just having a little segment in each module of the NLP practitioner program that was specifically neuroscientific, highly experiential. It was not diagram.
Yeah.
It was relating to what have we done on that module and how does the neuroscience give us a fresh perspective, a different understanding. And the feedback, because it was experimental to begin with, we really didn't know. The feedback's consistently been, people are slightly like, ooh, I don't know about this. And then they go, that was really interesting. But a lot of the time, there are these very fulsome thanks to Tricia at the end of that little segment, because they've got something which they can walk away and use, but they've also got a language to describe what they've been doing. So, that I think is, that's a very important thing. And you actually asked, how have I benefited from it? I benefited from it not because I've suddenly gone, oh, well, all this NLP, well, it's not really, doesn't really work, does it? Or something. After a rather successful career using it. I mean, that has not been the experience at all. It's been quite the reverse. It's actually very validating, but it also, I think, will give people a way of starting to question, what's the difference that makes a difference? What are the key elements? Because, in my experience, any tool, any technique that's been developed, if you're using it over time, you will refine and refine and refine. And the real refinement is stripping away. It ends up being simpler. And I think the neuroscience will ultimately contribute to that as well. And to me, that's a benefit.
Can I just add in the other thing that we've experienced, the applied neuroscience course, when we first ran this course, my take on it was that we were going to be teaching some people about the brain. And that was all that I'd imagined would happen. And we got to the end of it, and I heard a different language in the people that were using this stuff. And it was as if they were being able to separate the person from what their brain was doing. And as a result, they were more compassionate to the person because they understood that that was just the way that the brain was working. And therefore, they weren't doing something malicious or nasty. It was just the way the brain worked. And the language they were using was the language of compassion. And I think that's one of the things, the elements that binds everything that we do together. The neuroscience, the NLP, and the coaching all lead to a greater compassion for self and others. So, you know, if you want a bit more of that, then that would be a really good reason to come.
Wonderful. Thank you.
That's really very true. It's profound, and it's not that everybody's being oh so very caring and sharing. It's not that at all. I remember a company director who came on the applied neuroscience, and he was in a position where he needed to make some radical changes in this business if it was going to survive. And he was able to do that in a different way because of what he'd learned, and he could engage with the people differently. And it really talk about having an impact on people's lives. It was for the good.
Absolutely.
And he was the one who told us. He said, I'm doing this differently now. So there was a different kind of consciousness ultimately. And he did what needed to be done, and the business was then in a very good place.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. So what inspired you to want to present one of the masterclasses next year?
Well, I think very simply, we're on a mission to make sure that people know what's possible and to do the translation between disciplines. See, so one of the interesting things about Tricia, and it's true for me as well, is that we both spent our lives collaborating with parties, and collaboration is often challenging. People sometimes get hooked up on, well, whose IP is this, and am I going to lose out? I've only got one idea. I don't want it taken away from me. It's like kind of sad. But real collaboration involves across disciplines, across mindsets, across worldviews, even, whatever it may be. And being able to do that is just so incredibly helpful, and it's enriching. And this is one such example. If you want to say it's NLP meets neuroscience, you could do that. I remember when we first started, there was a kind of slogan that just popped into my head one day, and I was so appropriate enough staring out of a window in a lake at the time, which was, the magic of NLP and the rigor of neuroscience. And there is something about that, without getting too slogany, when you can have both and allow the difference, then so much is possible. And, we're very different kinds of people, and yet we have a great time together.
Yeah.
And we don't do it because it's necessary or we need to pay the mortgage or something. It's like, exactly. Look at Tricia's face. It's just,
it's fun.
we have a good time.
Yeah.
And that's true in the programs, it's true outside as well.
We're doing this very much because we're both communicators, and we feel that we have something really important to communicate.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ian and Tricia. It's been really informative. I am looking forward to your session, and I'm looking forward to the book. So just to remind people watching, Tricia and Ian are presenting an NLP Masterclass in November next year. So it'll be Thursday, the 13th of November, and it'll be 1700 hours for which will be GMT, because the clocks will have changed by then. And it's for 3 hours plus a half-hour break at some point. So we're allowing 3.5 hours for that. And as I said before, the topic is how are NLP and coach neuro-effective? So thank you so much, Ian and Tricia, and look forward to seeing you in November.
Thanks, Karen.
Likewise.